Chuck Greaves and Lisa Taylor, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here.
A little bit different conversation this time, partially because I'm involved in this project, but we're going to talk about the new anthology called Four Corners Voices that you and I, two of you and myself, helped pull together over the last 6 months or so. So we're going to talk about that in a second, but first, I just want to introduce you folks to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast, the vast audience. Lisa, could you just introduce yourself to folks? I know you were at Colorado Gold this year at the conference and you're an RMFW member, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Lisa C. Taylor. I have two books of short stories and 3 books of poetry. I serve on the Four Corners with the board of the Four Corners Writers. I've been with that for a while. And along with Mark Stevens, we co-direct the Mesa Verde Writers Conference and New Literary Festival. And I have a new novel coming out called The Shape of What Remains. It should be out the end of February. So I'm really excited about that.
After years of writing poetry and short stories, to have your first novel come out must feel pretty terrific.
Yeah, it really does. And I actually have a second in the pipeline that I have an agent interested in. So it appears I'm entering the novel writing stage of my life. So I'm pretty sold on novels right now.
So what
It's not too late to turn back.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, I still write poetry. I just got asked to submit some poems to an anthology. So, I do other things, but I really do like the long narrative of a novel. It allows you to develop a real story, and that's pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, we will get you back on the podcast to go into greater detail about the first novel coming out in February or March, was it?
The end of February is what
Okay.
I've been.
Great. Chuck, tell us about you.
Well, I'm the author of 7 novels so far, 2 from Bloomsbury, 3 from Minotaur. I mostly write in the crime fiction genre. My last novel was called The Chimera Club, came out in 2022. It was a Colorado Book Award finalist, and it won the Cal Award for Best Mystery.
There you go. And also some songwriting and some screenplays.
I've had one TV pilot produced, and I've got some other features out there trying to find their way in the world.
And actively pursuing the screenwriting, that sort of seems to be the main focus lately, would you say? Is that fair?
It is. I decided after 7 novels that it was high time to devote my energy to try to get some of my IP, into Hollywood. So I'm writing screenplays. I'm dealing with some actors I work with on that pilot and other people, contacts. Yeah, I'm trying to break into Hollywood, basically. And that's been the focus of my energy for the past year, at least.
Yeah. Well, you used to live in LA, so you have at least, I lived in LA for a couple of years too. And it's a huge city, but it seems like, the LA and the Hollywood sort of presence is just all intermingled. When you're there, you can just feel it, like Hollywood just feels like it's there. So,
Well, I was a lawyer for 25 years in LA, and my clients included Arnold Schwarzenegger and Richard Pryor, whom I represented for 10 years. But I've been out of LA now for close to 20 years. And the way to break into screenwriting in Hollywood is to be 25 years old and move to LA, and try to get hired in a writer's room. Doing it from Cortez, Colorado has been a bit of a challenge.
Yep. Well, I'm no doubt you'll get there. That's my feeling based on what I'm hearing about how well some of the pieces have been faring in the contests you've been entering. So it'll happen. Well, let's talk about Four Corners Voices. We are talking on Tuesday, December 10th, and today is the official publication day of Four Corners Voices, a project that really is only about 6-7. There it is. Chuck's holding it up for our visual YouTube Zoom based audience. That's terrific. Great prop. So it's really about a 6-month-old, maybe 7 at the most. Chuck, could you just kind of walk us through the history of how this came to be? And maybe you want to start with coming together with Four Corners Writers and getting that all formalized? I don't know.
Sure. The anthology came together very quickly, as you've indicated. Four Corners Writers dates back to about 2017, when a small group of local writers down here in the Cortez, Mancos, Dolores, Durango area started to get together to talk craft and the business of writing at a local library. And we did that for a while informally. Then COVID hit and we sort of stopped meeting for at least a year and a half. And then we resumed meeting and our group grew larger. We started meeting at the Mancos Public Library. We have a local gallery here in Cortez called the Zoo Gallery. It's a very welcoming ZU Gallery, a very welcoming space for all sorts of creative endeavors. And Jody Jarling, who's the owner of Zoo Gallery, invited us to formalize our meetings and hold them on a monthly basis, which we do on the third Wednesday now of every month. We get anywhere from 25 to 35 writers, some experienced, some not, at our meetings. And we applied for a grant from a local nonprofit called the LOR Foundation, LOR Foundation. And they, in combination with the city of Cortez's 81321 launch initiative, they together gave us a generous grant to publish an anthology of local writing, which is sort of a next step in the evolution of our group, Four Corners Writers. We also use that grant money to incorporate and become a 501c3 nonprofit. So we're now formal. We're a tax exempt entity, and we're having our monthly meetings. And now we have this anthology. And as you said, today's publication day, so we're super excited about that. And the hope is it's not the last of the anthologies we'll be producing going forward.
Yeah. Before we get into the step by step, and I just want to talk about what we went through to pull the anthology together. One thing that just really is so fascinating to me is, all you have to do is shake the bush a little bit, and there are writers everywhere. When we first started meeting, it was kind of us published authors kind of gathering around, and we decided to say, okay, what can we offer to the writing community? What programs and what can we do to pull the writing community together? And that first night at Zoo, one of the first nights at Zoo Gallery, when people just poured in, and suddenly we had a room full of all these different kinds of writers. And I guess my point is, if you want to find your writing community, they're there. I don't think it matters where you go. Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they're just, when I first moved here, and I only moved here 4 years ago, I thought, oh, I don't think there are any writers around here. I'm just going to kind of be by myself and, oh well. And then I met Mark, strangely when he was playing in a band. And I thought, okay, there's one writer. And then Mark had a lot of connections. And then pretty much it was like, really for all of us, a lot of word of mouth. We did a fair amount of social media advertising, but people just kind of came out of the woodwork. And, I always wanted to write my memoir, or I've been secretly scribbling poetry for years. And it's very validating to get those people in one space and have them be encouraging to each other. We have different speakers that actually teach some concrete things that might be of use to both beginning and experienced writers, because all of us, even if we have books, we can always learn new things, and we need to learn new things. So I just was amazed at the community. And I have to say that our age diversity is incredible. We have a high school student who regular comes, and then we have people probably in their 80s. So it's just all over the map in terms of age and experience and background. And that really adds a richness to it that's beautiful. And I think the other thing we do that's unique is there's no hierarchy. I mean, we have people going, like Chuck and Mark and myself, and we all have books. And it doesn't matter that we have books and that other people don't have books. Sometimes people feel like people who are well published are basically not going to talk to you because they've already gotten there. They don't really need to do that, and it's just not like that. It's all about encouraging writers at any level of their journey, and I really do love that about it. I really value it.
Chuck, you've lived here the longest among us by far. I've only been here 5 years, 5.5. It must feel good even to you to see this writing community come together on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's a good point. I moved here in 2012, and it was really a bit of a literary desert, I'd have to say. And one of the first things I did was to contact the publisher of the local newspaper, the Four Corners Free Press, Gail Binkley, and I pitched her the idea of doing a book review column in the Free Press, and she was open to that. And so Scott Graham from Durango and I took turns. It was a monthly newspaper, really a magazine. We took turns writing book reviews, and we did that for the better part of close to 8 years. And
Yeah.
toward the end, Mark, you joined us, and so we all traded off on doing that. So that was the first foot in the door. I partnered with the local library to bring some writers in. Jonathan Evison came and spoke at the library. Beau L'Amour, Louis L'Amour's son, spoke at the library, and some local authors, and I hosted those events. Yeah, and then Four Corners Writers was sort of the next step in that progression.
Yeah. Very cool. And just so folks know, if you're listening out there and you say, okay, Four Corners, what is that? And where are you all? Lisa and I live in Mancos, which is about 24 or 5 miles west of Durango. Chuck lives further west still past Cortez and down a beautiful, beautiful canyon called McElmo Canyon. And Chuck is actually the closest to the actual Four Corners spot where states come together, but we call it Four Corners, and we did reach out, and we do try to reach out regionally, but it's primarily Southwest Colorado, which has got the energy going at this point. I do think we'd love to make it much more regional if possible and include Moab and Flagstaff and Farmington. But we do get folks coming over from Durango to our meetings in Cortez, and it's just great to see a corner of the state kind of put itself on the map in terms of literary talent.
Yeah, I'll also mention here when we talk about initiatives, another thing I did was I partnered with the Cortez Public Library. When I was in Pasadena, okay, I served on the Pasadena Public Library Foundation board for 20 years. So I've been involved with public libraries for a long time. When I was in Pasadena, we did a thing called One City, One Story, a community-wide reading initiative where everybody read the same book. And then we had invited the author to come to the library, and we had events surrounding the book. I pitched that idea to the Cortez Public Library. They took the ball and ran, and pretty soon 6 different city libraries, from Montrose to Moab to whatever, 6 of us got together, and we did we called it Four Corners One Book, I think it was called. And my novel, Church of the Graveyard Saints from Torrey House Press, was the novel that we did. And we did that in 2019, I believe it was. And then again, COVID hit. So it kind of went on hiatus. When it came back, Mark, you did a version of it, I believe. And
Yep.
Hopefully that's something that will resume as well.
Yep. Yep. Lisa. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say the libraries are really special to me as well. I think they really have long been my partner in my writing journey. And I came from New England in Connecticut, and I was part of the Connecticut Authors Trail, which is authors that visit different libraries throughout Connecticut, and they feature certain authors. Actually, would love to see something like that happen here, where they get like a little booklet and stamps when they go to an author event at a library. But I've done programs at Cortez Library, Mancos Library, and it's just they're wonderful partners for writers, because obviously they already love literature and they want to promote reading. And that's a perfect partnership for us. So we did our first event for the Four Corners Anthology at Cortez Library, and we had an overwhelming response. I don't think any of us expected all the people that came. In fact, we had to continually bring in chairs. We ran out of chair space, and all of us were helping, all hands on deck to bring in chairs and accommodate this amazing crowd. So obviously there's great enthusiasm in this area.
Yep. Well, as the son of 2 librarians, I co-sign everything you guys just said. And I think, just as a tip to anybody out there, if you're writing fiction, you should be thoroughly involved and immersed in your library network and your local bookstore network, and just going to every little possible event that comes through and making yourself available to help for anything along those lines. Let's get to the anthology. Go ahead, Chuck.
One last thing I wanted to say, Mark, and that is that your arrival here in the Four Corners was a real catalyst for everything we've been talking about. Mark, you're a real hub of the scene here. You're a charismatic, magnetic guy, and really you've done a lot more than I think all of us to make the literary scene happen here in the Four Corners.
Well, thanks for that. I think it's just great synergy. Lisa being here, and just Bethany, Kevin Jones, Scott Graham, you've already mentioned, everybody, it's just natural energy around this. And I think there's a natural energy to writers and their willingness to help each other. Yes, we have our own projects and our own careers, our own writing voices. Everything about our processes for our writing is unique to us, but we share so much and how we can help. And I know we all get this. I just had this buzz that first night when people came in and we didn't know who they were. And now we have names, of a good 25 people that are coming on a regular basis who are learning. And, because I think you and Lisa, we all get the same feeling out of writing that is special. And we want to encourage others to get to that point where they're really feeling good about what they can produce on the page. I mean, it's that simple. So,
Amen. Amen.
yeah. So let's get to the production of the anthology. I think it might have been May, maybe it was April. And I'm not even sure who was, Chuck, was it you who said, let's do an anthology? Kind of like, what is it, Judy Garland and what's Mickey Rooney? Let's put on a show,
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
getting the grant, of course, was
yeah.
that was the trigger. Once we had that, it was off to the races. And we targeted trying to get the book out before Christmas,
Right.
for sales purposes, and we're coming in right under the wire.
Yep. So we decided early on we wanted to represent poets, pull in essays, nonfiction, and short stories. Lisa, you edited the poetry. Chuck, you edited the short stories, and I edited and chose the essays. And basically, the idea was we put out a call for submissions last summer. I don't remember the dates, of course, but if I remember correctly, September 1 was going to be the submission deadline. And we set some specifications around the submission in terms of length. And we had no idea what we'd get. We're clueless. I mean, we were really wondering, would we get overwhelmed? Would we get enough? What if we didn't get enough quality submissions? It was not uncertain.
Well, I think the big fear is we wouldn't get any or very few.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't be enough to really populate an anthology. But it turned out to be, we had over 150 submissions. So that was fantastic.
Yeah. And I had 90 poems, which was amazing.
Lisa,
So,
why don't you talk a little bit about going through 90 poems, looking for 24, and then Chuck, I'll ask you to go through the short stories, then I'll talk about the essays a little bit. But Lisa, how did you go about that? Have you ever done something like that before?
yeah, actually, this is about the fourth or fifth anthology I've edited. So yes, I have been through that process before. So basically what I did, obviously, is I read everything about 3 times. And then, like we all do, I kind of separated it into piles of, needs editing, but has a lot of promise. With poetry, I look for sort of an overarching theme that really moves me. So I want images, I want beautiful language, but I want it to have an idea that's cohesive and it kind of moves me. And there did seem to be there were a lot of things about the flora and fauna of this area. If you look at the titles of the poems, there's My Desert, there all this stuff about our landscape. Not everything. I mean, some stuff was more personal, and that's okay too. I like the variety. But it was interesting how many people had really a lot of reverence for the beautiful landscape that we are blessed to be in. And that was interesting. So it definitely has a flavor of Four Corners because most people wrote from that. And they were, you know, it really ran the gamut. I did not look at people's bios or backgrounds because I really wanted to be unbiased. And I, you know, when I did later, I found, you know, some of them were first-time writers. They've never had anything published, and others were very well published or had advanced degrees. It ran the gamut. But it was really to me completely and utterly about the work. Does it move me? Does it work on more than one level? Poetry has to work on a literal and a figurative level. That's what I always look for in poetry. And that was what I was doing when I was editing. And I did work with several of the poets, more on formatting than anything else, because formatting poetry is difficult. And not a lot of people know how to do it. So some of it was written like in a prose format, and it wasn't intentional. They just didn't know how to format it. It's fine if it's intentional. So I helped, I worked very closely, and I know we all did, to do editing back and forth. So it was really, you know, a lot of work. It was a lot of months of work of back and forth with editing, to get to the 24 poems that made the final cut. And I feel really happy with the selections. I think it's a really good cross section of work and a variety of topics too. So it was an honor, and it was a lot of fun to see what people in this area are writing. And also, as Mark I think mentioned, we didn't know these people. I mean, I knew a few of them because some of them might come to the Four Corners group, but when we met them at the library, it was really fun to put a name, you know, to a face and say, oh, now you're the one that wrote whatever. Because a lot of people came who weren't readers, they just came to support the event. So I really enjoyed that. And so there were surprises. Like I didn't know some people were, whether they were older or younger, or even sometimes what gender they were, because some of them had just initials before their name or whatever.
Right.
So that was really interesting. And you know, I really feel like it's a great cross section. And it was hard
Yeah.
because, you know, they were, you know, it would be great if we could take everybody, but we couldn't. So we had to be discriminating. And I think that that's true of any anthology or any publication you do, that
Yeah.
everybody's going to make the final cut. And maybe it's incentive for the people who didn't make it. And it's something we can talk about in the Four Corners group down the road, is, you know, how to get your work to that place where it may have a better chance of being accepted. Because there's nobody who writes and publishes who hasn't been through rejection. It's just part of the business.
Yep.
So, but it was really insightful for me. I really enjoyed doing it.
So Chuck, walk us through once you got your submissions in, what was your process? What was your approach?
Sure. Let me begin by saying that the mission of Four Corners Writers is to identify, develop, and promote literary voices in the American Southwest.
Perfect. Yep.
So consonant with that mission, I was very pleased to see that quite a number of pieces that ended up in the anthology are first-time writers. And so for these, sometimes young writers, sometimes older professionals who are writing maybe for the first time, taking it seriously. This is their first opportunity to be published, to hold a book with their name on it and their work in it. So that's a very exciting part of this whole process for me. The submissions, I think there were roughly 30 short story submissions. I think they quickly fell into three categories. One category was definitely we're going to publish this. It was just a really good short story. I'd say there were 4 or 5 that fell into that category. I'd say there were as many that fell into the category that really weren't up to snuff and really weren't given consideration at this point. And then there was a vast middle there where, there were some tough calls I had to make. And I feel badly, at some level for the people who didn't make that cut from that middle group. But again, I think overall, the 12 stories that ended up in there are really solid. Some are really outstanding. And I think it reflects the overall quality of the anthology.
Yeah. Remind us, I mean, or for those who are listening, the requirements were not necessarily, as I turn off my phone, we didn't necessarily require that you live here, but you had to have some connection or have lived here to be eligible.
Right. The submission guidelines said that preference will be given to pieces that were written by Four Corners writers and or were set in the Four Corners. And
Yeah.
I think that's true. Lisa mentioned that a lot of the poetry deals with the local area, and I think that's also true of your essays.
Yeah.
Many are set or deal with events or people or just the setting of the Four Corners. Fiction was a little bit different. The fiction is kind of all over the map. I had stories set in outer space and stories set, could have been set anywhere. So the fiction ranges a little bit farther afield, I think, than the essays and the poetry.
Yeah. Yeah, I had quite a few what I call walk in the woods kind of essays of
Right.
absorbing nature and relaying it. So it was hard to, in the 12 or 13, I ended up with 13 essays to pick a mix. So I had a few walks in the woods and a few things about other elements. And I was surprised at the variety, including a emergency room doctor who wanted to revisit what it was like to be an emergency room doctor during COVID. And then, interestingly enough, I just had a senior citizen, a woman, write what I thought was an essay just about being in the COVID experience, but then she had this very, very touching moment at the end, which really blew me away, and some other experiences around farms and animals and things like that. But it was also tough. I had high 30s, I think, in terms of number of submissions, and there were a few, and I want to ask you each about how you applied your personal preferences to your selection process, because I found myself saying this isn't something I would want to read as a reader if I picked this up, because it's just not to my taste. And I'll be transparent and say I'm just not a mystical guy. And so I got some pieces that were kind of mystical, and they just weren't up my alley. So I would rather have seen something else get published that to me was a little more grounded in what I consider the real world. That's just my bias. Did you find, Chuck, did you find yourself applying personal style points?
I'm sure I did. I mean, all reading is subjective, of course, Mark. And since your podcast goes out to writers, and in some cases, relatively new writers, let me just say this. There were a lot of fiction pieces that were submitted that I would call anecdotal. So they may have been beautifully written, and they had a beginning and a middle, but they really didn't have an ending.
Yeah.
My preference clearly was for pieces that were stories that had a beginning, a middle, and an ending. One way I described it to one person who didn't make it and was asking me why, I said, you could type "to be continued" at the end of the story, it would make perfect sense.
Yeah.
And that's not what you look for in a short story.
No.
Short story should have an ending, and at the end, it should evoke an idea, an emotion, something. And I think in that middle group, that were well written, I definitely tried to choose stories that were stories that worked as a short story.
Yep. Lisa, how about you? You had some personal issues.
Yeah, it was a little different with the poetry, but like Mark, I do, we all have a bias, and I did have a bias, and I did stay away from things that were they're blatantly you called it mystical, religious, spiritual, whatever, because they weren't general where people could relate, and that is absolutely my bias. But I, as far as the style, they were all over the map. I mean, some of them were informed, some of them were, there's at least one prose poem, and prose poems are written in a prose format, and this is an intentional prose poem, and it worked beautifully as a prose poem. So I didn't, work with them and say, you need to format this into with line breaks and stanza breaks, because it was intentional. So I like to think that, maybe I'm deceiving myself, but I like to think I'm very open-minded about poetry. In terms of style, I like a variety of things. I like some form poems. I certainly like a variety of topics. I mean, we really do have a range in the poetry selections from somebody who's concerned about school shootings to somebody who really is very nostalgic about their childhood growing up around here, to somebody who was nostalgic about fishing with a grandfather. I mean, it really ran the gamut, and I think it's a great representation of what people are thinking about and writing about. And that was kind of my intention, is to make it be general enough that a lot of people could relate to it. Because it's like that with poetry. You might look at a bunch of poems and think, well, only these three speak to me, and the rest aren't really not relevant. And that's probably true of everything that you read. So you know, it was difficult at times to figure out what we could include, that what I wanted to include that was well written, and also my bias, which is that the poem at the end, it's like what Chuck said about endings. Well, with poems, I'm definitely a fan of endings that open up the poem to a bigger reality, like it gives you something to think about at the end. That is kind of my bias. I think those are more successful poems, and I have to say, most of them did that. So I feel like it got where I wanted it to go. So I'm pretty proud of the selections.
For anybody out there who might be listening to this or get an idea and think to themselves, hey, this little regional group down there in Southwest Colorado produced an anthology, we should try that here. What are some of the keys to success, or what are things you'd pass along as tips to somebody? Because we started from scratch 7 months ago, 6 months ago, and here we are. And I have to say that, it looks good. It looks pretty darn professional to me. It's so what would you say, how to get organized, how to start? Any pass along any suggestions, Chuck?
Sure, Mark. I mean, you can probably speak to this better than Lisa and I can, but we knew we needed a cover. So we actually had a cover art contest, and we offered a $250 prize to the selected artwork, which ended up being a photograph we all liked. So that was part of it. You needed a designer, a book designer, interior and exterior designer, in which case we used Jody Chappell, who does a number of books and is very good at it. So we had that lined up in advance. We put together very detailed submission guidelines that we put out. We put them out within our Four Corners writers group, but we also put them online and hit social media hard and put posters around town hard, trying to get as many diverse voices as we could to submit. And that worked out pretty well. The submission guidelines basically had a page limit, pardon me, a word limit. The usual stuff you expect, font and size and that kind of stuff. So we did that. Cost, I think when the smoke clears, the actual cost of producing the anthology is going to be about $5,000. I think that's a good estimate. And now we're entering the marketing phase, and by the way, to be clear, this is all volunteer. None of us editors are getting paid. Nobody's getting paid for any of this. We did offer, we did offer the writer gets a small honorarium plus a free copy of the book.
And a publishing credit.
A publishing credit, right. Yeah. And with any luck, maybe, who knows, a Colorado Book Award finalist credit. We'll see.
Yeah. Lisa, anything occur to you in terms of how, if you were to pass along suggestions to another group, is there anything lessons learned kind of thing, or tips to be organized or planned out?
I think a lot of what Chuck said, but also getting the word out as early as you possibly can. And, I'm thinking in my head, while Chuck is talking, that I know two people that submitted that are not on social media. So I think the posters really did something. In fact, one of the best stories that was entered was by somebody who was not on social media. And I just happen to know that about this person. So we can't assume that everybody is online just because we are. And so you have to have a variety of things. If you can get it on the radio, if you can, I can remember going around town and putting up posters, putting them up at City Market, putting them up in our local coffee shops. And I think that really mattered because people did see it. And we got submissions from people we wouldn't usually get, who might not be online as much as some of the people are. and that gives you diversity of voice, and that's kind of what we wanted, and we also gave it to some of the schools, and we had, I think it was it two high school students that are in it. I think, well, actually one of them in one poet is actually a middle school student.
Wow.
Yeah, yes. One of our poets is a middle school student, and we had at least 3 entries from that class, and I chose one of them. And I don't know if those classes entered in the other categories, but they did enter poems. So that's pretty cool. In fact, tonight I'm going to be at the theater because I worked with a class on poetry, and they're presenting tonight. So there is some real interest in the schools, and of course there's interest in writing, but in getting their work out there and learning how to do that. So it was pretty cool that a teacher actually entered, helped the kids enter. So I think that's another NTAP resource if we can get some of the teachers. And I know we have a teacher that is also a poet who is in the anthology, and they can be great advocates so we can have more diversity of voices.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the anthology is not just members of Four Corners writers.
Yeah.
You really did shake the bushes way out beyond, and we probably could have even done a better job, but then we would have had bigger piles to sort through. But it was pretty cool to see pieces come in from folks who didn't really have any direct connection with the writing group itself. But now maybe we can pull them in a little bit, so the writing community gets stronger.
Yeah,
As
it's actually happened. A couple of, at least I can think of 3 that came when they found out they were in the anthology. They're now coming to the Four Corners,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I
yeah,
think that's another way that it happens. That
yeah. Chuck,
Yeah,
did you want to say something
yeah.
right?
I just want to say, of the 12 fiction pieces, one is by a high school student, a high school senior, and we have several native voices I know in the book. So
Yep, yep. Well, it's pretty exciting now on launch day that we're talking to now turn the corner into marketing and trying to get the word out. And we are planning an event at the local Sunflower Theater in Cortez at the end of January, where we're going to have a dozen or 14 of the writers read excerpts, or in some cases, their full poem. And we'll make a production out of that, hopefully. And hopefully, folks will get the word out about the availability of this literary buffet that is available to absorb and get a flavor for the talent down here. But
and again, part of the learning process, part of the teaching process from us, okay, you've submitted, congratulations, you were successful, you're published now. Now we're going to talk about marketing. Now we're going to talk about doing public readings. This is all part of the process of becoming a writer. And so a lot of these people are going to get that experience for the first time with this book.
yep, just as some of them are dealing with rejection for the first time and getting used to that very normal part of being a writer is rejection, and learning how to deal with the opinions, subjective opinions of the editors you're trying to entice to publish your stuff. A lot of times it doesn't happen. Most of the times it doesn't happen. Yeah. So great. Well, this has been a great rundown. Thanks for this. Thanks for it was enjoyable working with both of you on this project, and we'll see round 2 who gets to edit next time around. But there is the volume again on the visual. And as we wrap up, we always like to recommend who have you been reading, or maybe a book. Lisa, we'll start with you just to pay it forward a little bit.
Sure. I just finished the Shreds, it's called Shred Sisters by Betsy Lerner. And she oh, I even have it. Actually bought the hard copy, which I almost never do, but I read it in the New York Times and it really sounded interesting. And she is a first-time novelist. She's a longtime agent, but a first-time novelist, and she's I think she's like 65 years old. So it's pretty cool that she's a first-time novelist, and it's actually gotten rave reviews. It's been, I think it's on the New York Times bestseller list, and I loved it. I thought it was a really interesting story, and I would recommend it.
Great. Chuck.
Well, I'm a pretty eclectic and omnivorous reader. I recently finished Playground by Richard Powers, big bestseller. And I'd highly recommend that. Very thought-provoking book, especially at the end. The ending stands the whole book on its head, which is really interesting. I then went back and for some reason was motivated to reread Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I gave that a quick read. That's probably the third time I read it. And now I'm about to start Zach Podmore's book, Life After Deadpool, nonfiction, set down here in the Four Corners. It's about Lake Powell. And so that's what I've been reading. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I'm gonna chip in my two books here, but I have to read that Zach Podmore book. He's a great writer, and I care about Lake Powell and have spent a lot of time there, so I want to read and learn more. My two are a fantastic novel by Willie Vallotton called The Horse. Willie's just a terrific writer, very dry, very empathetic characters, always talking about and featuring down and out characters who don't have much in terms of wherewithal or means to their lives. He's really got his eye out for the downtrodden folks in our world. And that book is particularly strong because Willie he leads a band called the D-Lines, and he led a band called Richmond Fontaine, and he's a terrific musician in addition to being a terrific writer. And The Horse is about a mid-60s retired guitar player with a really interesting past. And the other book I'll recommend is nonfiction, Dead Wake by Eric Larson, about the sinking of the Lusitania. Just, you cannot take it's just a page turner. It's a page turner. And we know what happens. We know it gets sunk, but he has a terrific way of telling that story from the perspective of the U-boat captain, from the captain of the Lusitania. And he goes also to Wilson, the president. And we see all these different aspects of the sinking of that boat. And so many things had to go right to, unfortunately, sink that boat the day it happened. Terrific nonfiction narrative. So those are my two picks. Yeah.
And Mark, before we sign off, tell us about your new book coming out.
I've got start of a new series coming out in April, a book called No Lie Lasts Forever. And I'm really excited about this new series. So more soon about that. And yeah, thanks. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Chuck Greaves, Lisa Taylor, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, and we will catch up with each of you down the road at some point.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.